We will get started, and I think other people will be drifting back into the room, but we want to keep going because there's a lot yet to happen this afternoon. It's about a little over 3 years ago now that I got first introduced to the Bridges Project, which is one of the things that you'll be hearing about in this next panel. And this is a group that brings together every month a group of about 50 people. It's about half leaders of the local Muslim and Sikh communities and about half leaders of various federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies headquartered in Massachusetts. Provides an extraordinary opportunity for communication about everything from tensions caused by law enforcement efforts, concerns about feeling profiled at the airport, to concerns about whether communities are being infiltrated or spied on. It provides a forum for communication when there are experiences of hate crimes and help is needed. So it's been a truly remarkable collaboration between communities and law enforcement with many important lessons learned along the way. I'm going to leave it to the members of the panel to talk about this work, but I do want to say that Darren Q and I have felt really privileged to be allowed to collaborate with these folks in recent years. The panelists today that you will be hearing from include Dr. Abdul Rahman Muhammad, who's the former president of the Islamic Council of New England, Alok Chakravarty, who is an assistant U.S. attorney in Massachusetts, Fatima Ismail, I know that. Fatima Ismail, who's a representative of the Dowdy Bora community in Billerica, and Ehsan, Ehsan Zafar, it's been a long day already. Ehsan Zafar, who is a senior advisor on civil rights and civil liberties for the Department of Homeland Security. So we will hear first from Dr. Muhammad.
Good afternoon. Today I'm going to speak about an experience that destiny put me in. And I reflect on that experience and then realize that there is quite a great deal of interesting things that are happening. Because my background is in academia. I taught for many years at Boston University, and I came to the Bridges as an assignment from the Islamic Council of New England. Because following September 11, there was quite a terrifying environment and atmosphere and state of fear amongst the Muslim community. And when I say the Muslim community, we should realize that the Muslim community is very diverse. Like the rapper says, it is Hajj every Friday in America. People coming from all over the world. And you are talking about so many different cultures and sects and beliefs and understanding of Islam that is marred by experiences in indigenous homeland in Africa or in Asia or Latin America, or you talk about the African American here or the Hispanic Americans or the Caucasian Americans who are coming into Islam. So it's quite a diversified group, and there's quite a lot of intercultural and interreligious and intra-cultural communication that takes place. Now, when I came to the Bridges meeting, that was a follow-up to previous engagement with the communities and the authorities following September 11, because Mayor Menino was so gracious to the point that he was very sensitive that immediately following September 11 gathered all the leadership of the Muslim and Arab and the Sikh community and have had a discussion with the different representatives of the authorities. That was quite an enlightening experience. Then later on, bridges came as a formalization or semi-formalization to the relationship between the community and the authorities. And understanding the backlash and realizing the importance of this forum, I approached the group on two levels. On my academic understanding of how people formulate their ideas and how they act and they react, and also feeling the pulse of the different members of the community. Now, let me just retract a little bit and speak about my understanding of social sciences, because personally, I feel, as Von Wright has correctly said, that social sciences have been trapped within two approaches: understanding and explanation. Understanding has to do with why things happen, and explanation, understanding why, how things evolve and the meaning behind events. But added to this dilemma is the issue of the philosophical trap that academia has been entrapped in, and that is the reflective activity versus the real life, as contemplative life, as Hannah Arendt once mentioned. That, in specificity, brings to mind the limiting factor of compartmentalization of knowledge that is very restrictive in a sense, but at the same time, dangerously creating an environment by which people understanding is entrapped within this paradigm that, as Kuhn says, that people put themselves or their ideas within. So given this and knowing how people process information and I don't here want to go into all those aspects of the cognitive versus the conditioning learning, but usually people know by two means of categorization and subsumption, by putting a list of things and then getting information fed into the information that they know. To do this, people everywhere, not only in the United States, but everywhere in the world, devise methods by which they encapsulate information so that it will be easily to be retrieved. And in this process of categorization and subsumption, a real problem happens, because then people resort to stereotyping. Sometimes they might not know it, not intentionally, but stereotyping does happen. And stereotyping followed by profiling, which create a real dilemma. After September 11, I could see the panic in the eyes of the children coming from school, talking to the community, and the fear that they have been experiencing, as well as the heavy hand that was befallen them. So I wanted to come to a place, because I taught so many different students, and I know that most of the people in authority or in the different agencies are a product of an educational system that has been framing certain sociological perspective and political ideological positions. I mean, something like this fiasco that was introduced by Huntington of the Clash of Civilization, which many people have built policies around it. And then you see the catastrophic consequences of people looking at issues from that perspective of the limiting factor of this academic endeavor that people get involved in. And then you see the debacle in Vietnam, the invasion of Afghanistan. By the way, I told Senator Kerry at the time that he was running for president, when he was making the presentation at Tufts University, that this would be a very bad idea, especially at that time of Ramadan, and the consequences are very serious. Iraq, what happened in Libya, all these kind of things let you realize that these people who are driving policies by objective never think about consequences. And the reason is simple, because the limiting paradigm of the comparative approach to things from the perspective of the difference over time and space limit people and make them not realize that they have to think about the cognitive dimension, the motivation, and this aspect that people have to know. So my approach to the issue was I need to engage the people from the different membership of the authorities and lead them to understanding of how the reality of these communities are. Because I knew that these people are following bureaucratic procedure that they have nothing to do with the formulation of a general policy. So it was really an interesting thing, and this brought to mind what Gadamer has said of the approaching social interaction as a hermeneutical process. You come with a understanding, and then as you engage into reading the text, then you are modifying your ideas, and by the end, you finish the text you have already finished, or change your mind and change the text itself. That's exactly what happened when we were encountering the dialogue and the debate and explanation within the setting of Bridges. So there was a lot of give and take. There was a great deal of modification of perspective. There is an evolving sense of sensitivity to people's feelings and emotions. And instead of somebody who is 74 years old being trapped at Logan Airport for 7.5 hours with having diabetes and high blood pressure, then people became sensitive and we started realizing, well, this is a humane dimension that we need to probe into and understand. So there was quite a lot of modification that was taking place within the different representatives of the authorities, as well as from our perspective also as a Muslim community, and trying to reach to the different communities that come from all over the world, in addition to the local communities. So the major thing that we have achieved in Bridges is that we have created a platform by which understanding becomes possible. That's why I hope that one day I will have the time to write about this experience in an extensive manner, because it shaped a great deal of what social scientists call praxis. Praxis is the situation whereby the process of implementing a theory or thinking about a theory or modifying reality becomes possible to integrate information that will create an evolution for the general public welfare. So the Muslim community, as I mentioned, is representative from people coming from Africa, Asia, Latin America, as well as indigenous African American and Caucasian, as well as, and this is a new trend, most of the incoming to Islam are from the elite Ivy League. And ironically, the largest number of converts to Islam come from the female gender. And these are highly educated, master's, PhD, and so on and so forth. So the issue was, how can we make sure that these people will feel safe, that these people will have a voice? Because if you are reflecting the community perspective and people are listening to you, and then you are going back to feed back to the community and tell them that there is a redress point that we can utilize, then people will feel at least relieved. They will feel a state of comfort, and also the democratic engagement of feeling that their voice is being heard and there is a response to their concerns. And now people say that they have never experienced coming to the United States and being treated as good as they are being treated now by the custom agents and by the immigration officials. So in a nutshell, what I want to say is that for me, the experience with Bridges have been enriching, both on the level of being a leader within the Muslim community, as well as an academic who is concerned about how processes of community engagement that bring about the integrity of human dignity a sense of commitment and a perspective on the lives of people that would never have been thought about. I'm 100% sure that if it were not for the platform of Bridges, I don't think ever that any one of the authorities would have ever thought about those nitty-gritty things that happen to common people. And thank you.
As Darren did at this morning's panel, I'd like to, with each speaker, just ask you one question to clarify and to push a little bit, and ask you to take just another 60 seconds. And what I'd like to ask you about, you've described the progress made in Bridges in terms of developing those trusting relationships, starting to break down stereotypes and develop genuine workable relationships. But I imagine that it wouldn't be fair to say that it's been a purely straight line of upward progress. So I wonder if you could say a word or two about what the significant obstacles are that you run into as the progress continues, and what you found to be the most effective ways of overcoming those.
Okay. The major problem that you are going to face in dealing with authorities is the bureaucratic stratification that is there. People have their guidelines, policies, and all these kind of things that they have to abide by. And on the other hand, you have the expectation of the community. So when you come in to raise an issue, then these people have their limitations. They need to go back and refer to their bosses and refer to the policies that are there, and then they will come with a different answer. So there is quite an elusiveness that takes place in the initial raising of issues. And sometimes that takes place because your meeting is every 1 month at the end of the month. So by that time, a lot of unease would have settled in the hearts and minds of people who are in the community and who have been subject to the distressing situation. So that is one problem. The second problem is that when you come with an idea, and here this is very important because you cannot preach, you cannot say this is what's supposed to be, or the propaganda that you can talk, or you are engaged in public relation or engaged in a debate, as much as it is an attempt to make people understand your perspective. Because people cannot change their mind immediately because you tell them this. It takes time, and this time that we have taken within the debate and the discussion in Bridges have helped us to grow, mature, and also have an impression on the policies that were followed. I'm not saying that we are 100% satisfied, but at least people in the community feel there is a vent through which people can speak up, and they feel that they are really actually democratically engaged.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, as a bit of a counterpoint to Dr. Muhammad, understanding from a community perspective some of the history, some of the sensitivity, some of the experiences that particularly the Muslim community has endured post-September 11th. Let me talk about the value proposition from the governmental side. And two things that I'm sure affect your work. I know it affects, I'm sure, Ms. Pandit's work when she was at State Department, and does mine, is the idea of what is the value proposition and what are the metrics? How do you know whether you're succeeding or not? And I'm not going to give you an answer to those questions, but I'm going to ask you to find answers to those questions. But I will kind of pose a scenario to kind of give you a different perspective. And then explain why it is that some of us have embarked on this endeavor, which is essentially an engagement forum for those of you who are not familiar with the Bridges program that we have here in Massachusetts. So imagine, if you will, sometime after September 11th, maybe even after the Boston Marathon bombings, an FBI agent getting wind of somebody, let's say at UMass Boston, somebody who has resigned from typical social interactions, who doesn't attend class anymore. It's a young person. It's a young man. It's a young Muslim man. It's a young Muslim man who spends a lot of time on the internet now. The dean's office or the registrar, whoever keeps track of the internet logs, notices that much of the traffic is to overseas websites. Doesn't know what they are, but it's significant enough to trigger an interest. The local campus police don't have anything bad to say about this person. All they know is that his roommates, his friends, his colleagues, they've noticed that he has checked out of his typical behavior, and now he's much more resigned. He's much more resigned to finding gratification in being with himself. Sometimes he goes to pray. He is becoming more religious. He has a small coterie of friends who look a little bit more like him than the other students that he interacts with. They stick to themselves. They talk in hushed tones when people come by. But by all accounts, he's still that good kid that did very well in high school, and now he's finding himself. He's finding his roots. He's going through what typical 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds go through. Imagine if that information then goes to somebody at the FBI because they hear something from anybody. Maybe it's one of the friends, maybe it's somebody down the hall in the dorm, or maybe it's somebody from the campus police who say, I have concerns about this guy. What should we do? And the FBI agent, who's trying to do their job, they go and they ask the people who know the person. They talk to people in the community, they talk to people at the school, and those people who have institutional interactions with this young man, they don't have much to say because they don't really know him aside from their brief transitory interaction. The people who are his friends, the people in that small coterie of folks, when the FBI agent goes to speak with them, they say, oh, we're not going to talk to you. And for some of the reasons that Dr. Muhammad explained, they probably have good reason to have that instinct. But they further say, they act on the instinct, say, no, we're not going to talk to you. And so the FBI agent is left with very little information. In an environment where security for everybody is the primary mandate of most governmental agencies. That FBI agent, or some Homeland Security, you name the agent, is left with a conundrum that either they can dig deeper, they can try to figure out what's going on with this kind of kid. Is it anything related at all to violent extremism? Is it anything that poses a public safety risk in any other context? Or is it simply somebody who is going through a certain phase of life, and the information that predicated this investigation may not have had any substance at all, or may have been incorrect, or worse, may have been malicious. So that's the context in which I have to go to every governmental agency and ask them, please, bring your resources, bring your representatives, bring your open heart, and let's try to fix some of the grievances, some of the problems, some of the systemic issues which infect the relationship between some communities, particularly some individuals within mostly, I'm just speaking now primarily about the Muslim and the Arab communities, who've had this unfortunate and unfair encumbrance of social expectations after 9/11, both internally and from broader American society. And let's come to the table and provide resources and try to address some of the problems so we can ameliorate some of them. So we can make those conditions better, so whether it be for a forum for venting or specific problem solving, we're going to be able to actually do something and take action as opposed to simply the plaudits of policy which often come out of Washington. And from a local perspective, that has a dramatic appeal, right? Because even though some of us work for the federal government, we kind of have a little bit of dominion over our backyard. And we have some more authority. And for people like Ashraf who question the prudence of joining a government that everything comes out of Washington, there are opportunities to kind of set the agenda that Washington then has to decide on. And this is one of them. Let's build it, let's make it work, and then let's fend off any of the criticism. But to be sure, the criticism is there. Because if I talk to the FBI and say, please, come to this forum, you're not going to be generating informants, you may not get any tips of a terrorist attack, but just come because it is the right thing to do by this government to its people. And this community right now needs that help, and we need the help from this community to understand the community, to understand the grievances, to understand the issues in which we can engage and actually make a difference, and understand the issues which will take something else. And for the last 10 years, that's exactly what we've done, and we've never been told no. There hasn't been a mandate, there hasn't been a budget, there are no resources, we often have to pay for our own food. But the fact is that on the state, local, federal levels, every single agency or entity that we have ever asked to come to the table has shown up, they've engaged, often they've repeated the coming for years. So that at this point, anybody at this table can pick up the phone, they know the name of somebody, they've probably broken bread with the person, and they can get the resources that they need, all outside of going to the Tip O'Neill building or going to the JFK or calling their congressman. The value of that relationship, I like to think, may not be apparent today, although sometimes it is. If there's a problem in the community that can be fixed with a phone call, then that happens. But the value of that relationship is something that reaps rewards over a generation. That over time, that the conditions that might give fodder to somebody who might have a more extreme belief, that it's much harder, it's a hostile environment for that person, both within their Muslim community, at the mosque, the community center, within their social circles at school and in other places, as well as when they engage with government. It's harder to believe you are disenfranchised when you not only have the rights and responsibilities of the average American, but you're getting a separate access, an access to address the specialized concerns that are very real and are going unheeded for a disproportionate amount of time. And that brings me to another tension with this value proposition. We're constitutional officers. Our job is to not show favoritism. It's not to advocate for hate speech or against certain types of behavior and for other types of speech-related behavior. So it really does constrain what government can do. And while we do play a role as a convener, as Ms. Pond had mentioned, I actually find that in the domestic issues that we deal with, the government is usually the offending actor. It's usually the policies at the border. It's usually an arrest that has impacted the community and raised the concerns. It usually are some certain profiling type behaviors. It's the very government agencies that come to the table that you can have a direct communication with about what their actions, the impact that their actions are having on a community. And so we're more than just the convener when we deal with things locally and domestically. And that's where this value proposition of having an audience with the people who are charged with executing those laws and regulations really makes a difference. And as Dr. Muhammad suggested, we do consider now, and I'm not sure we did before, but if we did, it was born out of ignorance or out of speculation rather than now out of really meaningful conversations. We do realize now more of what the impact is going to be of what the actions are that we are going to take. It doesn't prevent us from taking all of those actions, but how we take them can be modified to lessen that impact, to soften it, to demonstrate more consideration, and to prevent these future circumstances that give rise to the need for that enforcement action. It helps to lessen those conditions in the future. So when you imagine how we can try to kind of improve both the condition in which Muslims have felt in the last 10 years, generally, I know I speak in generalizations here, understanding fully that many of the Muslim communities not only feel fully integrated, but they feel like the value of this engagement is negligible to them and to their progeny because they are so fully integrated that it doesn't, the issues that we raise don't pertain to them. And that's a healthy place to be, but it poses a challenge to do very much what we want to do, which is reach out to youth, broaden the tent, and make sure that we're not just talking to our trusted friends every month, but rather we are broadening the net. We are demonstrating to other communities, including youth, that they have a voice, that we are providing a special channel, not a special channel in the sense of somehow discriminating or stigmatizing that channel, but providing another opportunity, if they choose to avail it, to have that engagement. If it's the type of issue that they can benefit from that engagement, then we're providing it. That given that, the challenge of expanding the tent, it makes it necessary that our partners be fully engaged in that process. Because if it's government who wants to go out and talk to the 18-year-olds at every university, how many 18-year-olds do you think will show up? There will be some, to be sure, but I'm sure they're not going to be the ones that you want to talk to in terms of some of the issues that we're concerned about. Which isn't to say that the only reason for our engagement is security policy. But that is the driving force behind when we talk to the different government agencies whose job it is to keep us safe. They need to be reminded, it needs to be refreshed to them as to why over a generation, by engaging in this practice, we may actually make things better, and so that those people will join the ranks of the very agencies who are charged with upholding the law. What a better way to show the promise of American engagement than to have these communities, members of the communities, the young people, the people who want to make a difference, actually join the government. Because I found, and again, back to Ashraf's, I think, very poignant question, I found that you can help set that agenda once you're in government. If what you're doing is the right thing to do, it's consistent with our values, it's consistent with our laws, and it makes things better. Because my guess is that everybody you go to in government wants to do something different and wants to do something better, and that they rely on that innovation in order to get there. And why wouldn't they take a flyer on somebody who's trying to do something interesting and actually may make a difference? So I just want to conclude with a couple points. There are many challenges to this process, but the biggest one is the absence of resources. It's hard to take this mandate that is really a coalition of the willing, of people who want to do it because it's the right thing to do. And that's where academics and community organizations, the civil society that we've heard about today, are so crucial. Because you are not only the force multipliers to actually go out and do things, but you're the ones who can overcome our constitutional restrictions on engaging on advocacy and engaging on religion and some of the other challenges about providing particularized services to some communities. Now we would offer this engagement to anybody, but particularly with the Muslim communities in our neighborhood, we want to make sure that they have fully an opportunity to engage, because as time goes on, our hope is that with that engagement today, we won't need that engagement tomorrow.
Thank you. And Alok, if I can just, if I can similarly just push you to go one step further for just a moment. One of the and you just referred to this a little bit towards the end of your remarks. One of the challenges I know that you run into is the constraints that you are under as a government representative and also as a prosecutor in what you're allowed to say. So much of what we try to do when building relationships across lines of conflict is about opening things up and demonstrating trust by sharing information. And you often are in a position where you can't do that in very important ways. How do you continue to move forward building trust when you've got that one hand tied behind your back?
That's an existential problem. Some communities have dealt with it by not having somebody like myself be a participant in in the dialogue. And I say what that, but what I mean when I say that is, I am a criminal prosecutor from 9 to 5, and sometimes often later. And I prosecute, amongst other types of cases, national security cases, cases that actually impact the community or involve individuals in the community. And when I discuss that fact with my colleagues in Washington, they say, well, how dangerous is that? Not only are you going to be alienating your partners on the other side, but you're not actually going to be able to talk about anything. And this is how I respond, and this is how I'm going to respond to your question. Who better to hear the voices of our community than the people who are actually charged with enforcing the laws or engaging in the actions that are going to be impacting them? We could easily have somebody who just does civil rights cases, who will only sue the government at the table. But what kind of systemic change are you going to have if you don't have the people who are most benefiting from the engagement in government? From being able to listen, to being able to understand the consequences of their actions, to be able to find more humane and more sensitive ways to engage in those actions going forward, than to have somebody who's actually shaping what the impact is going to be on the community. But without a doubt, it poses a challenge, and that's why, fortunately, I'm a lawyer, which means that I know how to watch my words. Often I mess up, but my job is to be careful and to be precise with regards to what I'm allowed to say. But more effectively, even if I may not say something, I can listen, and then I can act. And I submit to you that more happens by my inability to say something. Because the only way then I can show that I've heard something that Dr. Muhammad or Fatima or Essen have said to me, or something that they've pulled me aside and somebody like Shaheen or Riaz is mentioning, this is a real issue in my community right now, is to go contact the person who might be able to fix that problem, and so they can actually take action. And in that way, maybe it's a non-traditional avenue of governmental response, but as we've heard today, it's often those non-traditional avenues that reach the real rewards that we're trying to get to in government, which is to try to make things better.
Thank you. Having heard two perspectives on this Bridges project, process, we're now going to hear from Fatima Ismail, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the work that's been going on the community side of this whole process.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Not just the community side, the community has been participating in Bridges since 2004. My community has been participating in Bridges since 2007. And we were invited to attend by a friend of ours from the Islamic Society of Chelmsford. And that's how the community participation has been. It's just been loose. It's been where people just are invited by other members of the community to participate. There was no real organized effort by the community to get other community members at the table. So last year, we went and we did almost a year-long assessment of Bridges as to what we have accomplished so far, what our goals are, and what we need to do to make Bridges stronger in the future. So in order to accomplish that, we set up an outreach committee. And one of the jobs of the outreach community was to get a more regular attendance from the community member into the Bridges group. We would have sporadic attendance by some people, and then when we had occasions that were where the governor was the keynote speaker or there was some pressing issue in the community, we would have huge attendance, but then when that fizzled out, we would have very sporadic attendance from the community side. And the reason first being that I think most people were ill-informed about what Bridges did, or some of them were misinformed about what Bridges did. And in order to really Bridges to be effective, I think we need regular attendance, and we need to build trust and respect between the community and the government. And that cannot be done in a day, it cannot be done in a meeting, cannot be done when you attend 1 or 2 meetings. It has to be something that you have a regular dialogue and a discourse between the government and the communities. So in order to accomplish that, we have the outreach committee. The outreach committee is new. So I apologize, some of the members are here, if I speak out of turn as to what we really want to accomplish. Maybe our goals are too much. But we want to get greater engagement from the community. We want Bridges to be an organization or a group where the community members come to initially when they do have issues, that it's organized in such a manner that we are able to meet the needs of not just our community, but the greater community of Muslims. So first we formulated figuring out how many organizations do attend and how many are out there that need to attend. And we came up with a list of 34 organizations initially within the first meeting that we need to approach and that need to attend Bridges on a regular basis. And this doesn't even include all the Muslim youth organizations and universities. In order for Bridges to be effective, I think a huge sector of the Muslim community needs to be an active participant in Bridges. Even though I feel that the limited community involvement still was a good cross-section of what the community was feeling, because none of us held back. We spoke candidly. We are extremely involved in our communities, and we do listen to people, and we did raise some hopefully significant issues in our presence over there. So our long-term goal is to increase our participation. So the first thing we discussed was to make sure that we had no reservations about Bridges and what it's going to accomplish and what we felt that Bridges was all about. And we all concluded that it was an extremely effective way of communicating, because most Muslims feel that we don't have a voice. The media is not listening to us. Half the time when we turn on the TV, it's nothing but negative things being said about Islam. And it is a religion that has been hijacked, and it is a religion, anything bad happens, if it is to a Muslim, if it is a Muslim involvement, it's connotated to a religion, where in other religions that doesn't happen. And so it is frustrating. It is extremely frustrating as far as the community is concerned. So this is one way the community feels that, or should feel, that it has a voice in what it needs to be doing. So then we basically formulated that we need to come up with a plan as to how we're going to inform our communities about Bridges. And we've decided to set up a website. So that we put on our list of accomplishments, which are numerous over the past 10 years or more, and also put on our mission statement, which most of the organizations don't know what our mission was. So first thing our job is going to be is to educate the community as to what Bridges is all about. And that's going to be a task in itself, because most people have such a distrust for the government. They think Bridges is a way for the government to spy on us. And we said, okay, the government has a lot better ways of spying on us than through Bridges. So let's get real, and so let's So that was very easy to dispel. The second biggest stumbling block that we foresee is and we do know, there's a mistrust of the government. The reason the mistrust of the government, again, springs from, they feel that our phones are being tapped, our webs, we have no privacy on the web. There's a real feeling out there that that we, for just by the fact that we are Muslims, we are being stopped at the airports. We are questioned at great length when we arrive from our respective destinations from overseas. These are real concerns. They have a mistrust towards the government. So I think the next job we have is to convince them that, okay, if you have a mistrust towards the government, how do you resolve this issue? You start a dialogue that without communicating with them, you cannot dispel the mistrust. So first get yourself to the table and then judge whether what the reason that we are there. And I think that anybody that is at that table for a long period of time recognizes that it's an extremely valuable tool for the community to utilize. It is a tool where you can speak openly and freely about whatever issue that's on your mind, and I feel the government does listen. And if we need to get that word out to our community so it becomes a process in which the community doesn't feel that it is helpless, it's got no way of reaching the government, and at the same time, the government has a great resource to get our feedback firsthand without us doing anything about it. It's available to us every single month to come and voice your concerns. There's no better method of communication with your government in this democracy than bridges.
And so I guess my question to you is really about as you are making this outreach effort, and as you are now trying to, as you put it, convince people that it's worth entering into the conversation. I'm curious about both the pushback that you're getting, what you're finding is successful in trying to open people up to at least giving it a shot, and what you're finding does not work.
Now, this is, again, the outreach committee is new, so our experience is limited, so take that. But from the experience that we've had so far, it is very difficult to get a time commitment of showing up there every single month from the community. It's even difficult to get a time commitment from the board of directors of these from these organizations to meet with us, to listen to us. So it's going to be a long process. We are hoping that even if we get 1 or 2 new members to the table every single month, we'll be closer to our goal.
Thank you. Essen, I think that you're going to want the PowerPoint, yes?
Yeah, if you could put it up.
If we can get that up, that would be great. Essen Zafar from the Department of Homeland Security is going to talk a little bit about some of the other kinds of related efforts that are going on.
So I'd like to thank all of you for attending, and to Eben and Darren and all the other folks that have helped organize this fantastic symposium. Thank you for having me and my esteemed panelists here today. So what I'll do is focus on a kind of a macro model. We've talked a little bit, and I didn't have the pleasure of being here the entire time, but we've talked a little bit about engagement. Alok and some of my colleagues here, Fatima, have described a kind of an intimate model of engaging with religious communities. And what I want to do, at least what I can offer in this way, is step back and talk about a similar model of engagement from a macro level, what that looks like from a practical perspective, some of the issues that we've struggled with at the Department of Homeland Security as we've begun our engagement. We're a relatively new agency, and what answers we've come up with, and maybe some of those answers are helpful to the folks that are here that are working on similar issues, and maybe we can learn from your experience, and in fact, I have learned from a lot of what's been said here today. So before I begin, though, I sometimes like to, when I talk about these issues, highlight a personal story. I think that kind of brings us from the past to the present in terms of the issues that we're discussing. And I cover civil rights issues, and when I speak about anything over the next 10 minutes or so, I'll be talking not just about Muslim communities, and not just about religious communities or faith-based communities, but about any kind of community in general, whether it's an ethnic community or an interest-based group, because our mandate for engagement is quite broad at DHS. My last name was not always Ehsan Zafar. I grew up in the Middle East. I grew up in Kuwait. And my last name used to be Hussein. It was Ehsan Hussein. And when I came to the United States, we moved into a small town in LA where a number of folks had sent their sons and daughters overseas to fight the first Gulf War and to fight Saddam Hussein. And you know, I show up and my family shows up when we have the same name, and there's a lot of mistrust and, in fact, a lot of bigotry. Our tires got slashed, you know, folks threw things at our front window. And my father, a little concerned for our safety, changed my last name. And you fast forward 20 years, and our president's middle name is Hussein. So look how far we've come, right? But at the same time, that fact, the fact that he had that name, engendered a lot of pushback, a lot of distrust, mistrust. A lot of groups didn't like the fact that this individual was from this part of the world and questioned, you know, his faith and other parts of his background. So we still have a lot of work to do. So that's the work, that's the kind of mindset that we have, at least at the Civil Rights Office, when we look at these issues, that we've come a long way, but we still have a lot of work to do. And that's why engagement is important to us. Now, when we say engagement, what are we talking about? People use that word, community engagement. For us, it's kind of a spectrum. You know, engagement kind of starts at information. You know, that's kind of providing information to the community, to a religious group that they may not have, and that's the easiest form of engagement. Then there's kind of a process of consultation, which is taking the information from the community and sometimes just holding it, not doing anything, and sometimes trying to act on it as a government agency. That's also pretty easy to do. And then you kind of get into things like deliberation, and that's kind of the process that Bridges is about. It's a little bit harder to do. It takes a lot, you take a lot of risks. Alok and some of the folks here work without many resources and on their own time to get some of this work done. And kind of move on to partnerships and participation. You know, I don't think that folks got into this in Bridges, but Bridges is a great way, a great example of that as well, in terms of the trainings that occur through the Bridges process. And then you get to kind of delegation, which is kind of the government just kind of giving its part of its authority to a group to make a decision. And we try to go from A to Z. That's what engagement is to us. It goes from information to delegation. And then a lot of folks ask, and the resources were brought up as a challenge, why do you engage? Why do you spend scarce resources on talking to some of these communities? You know, it might seem obvious, the answer is obvious, but we often have to justify this when we ask for funding for engagement. One is really, as a government entity, we feel that it's our responsibility to assist religious groups and other NGOs to build coalitions. I'm from the NGO space originally prior to government service, and I found that when I was engaging with the government, not only did it force me to build coalitions with other religious groups and faith-based groups, but it forced me to kind of hone in and ask the questions, you know, what was important to me and my organization? when you're kind of forced to go or asked to go and speak to a government agency. It makes you focus on those issues out of the kind of the nebulous cloud of complaints that are out there. The other thing is, obviously is to encourage participatory democracy, and there's kind of inherent good in that. And then the third reason is accountability. Bureaucrats like myself that are not elected, yet given some marginal authority, have no kind of accountability. And so you want to hold us to account. And then the question then becomes, well, who are you talking to? This is almost always a critical question. Who's at the table? For us at DHS, and I'll kind of go into this briefly in a few minutes, we try to reach the folks that are the most disenfranchised, or the ones that you would never expect to come and talk to the community. Often this requires a lot of time, like Alok was talking about, or resources, personal time, personal resources to do, but we find that it also has the most payoff. And frankly, these are the individuals, the faith-based groups, that often have the most pressing concerns and often the most hostile attitude towards the government. And when it comes to issues like violent extremism or a young person's desire to express dissatisfaction in a violent way, you want to reach out to these folks and you want to give them alternatives to expressing dissatisfaction with government policy and working to work with the government to change that policy, or at least to understand it. So then, what does this engagement look like? We've kind of talked about, why we do it, what it is, what does it look like? At least for DHS, we have kind of a panoply of things that we do. The first are processes like the Bridges Roundtable, which you've kind of heard about intimately. We hold roundtables across the country in 14 cities, at least 4 times a year. We've held 5,600 of them since the agency was stood up. So the U.S. Attorney in many of these cities joins us. Other government agencies attend. And a lot of community stakeholders attend. In fact, the Muslim American population is a smaller fraction, I'd say about 20 to 25% of these roundtables. But they also attend as well in force, in greater proportion to their percentage in the population. We also have a complaints mechanism. Folks can kind of file complaints. Whether folks are satisfied with the resolution of those complaints is a different story. We have trainings, and this is again the kind of participation part of it. So we do a lot of cultural competency trainings, not only with our own staff and officers, such as TSA agents, but others about religious headgear. There's been misconception since 9/11, unfortunately, till today, that Sikh Americans are Muslim Americans, and they're not, obviously. But we want everybody that works for us to know that as much as possible. We have 55,000 TSA agents at any given time, and so they receive a training, a brief training, 1 day of their onboarding that talks about the various faith-based groups that they may encounter, the various religious headgear, and how to treat those individuals. And the how comes from some of these engagement efforts that we've undertaken. I don't know how much time I have to go through the best practices, and I can kind of go through kind of what we've learned on some of these issues. One of the best practices that we've had through all of our engagement work has been, I have a timer here, Evan, so I'm good to go, has been, do no harm. So we do not collect intelligence information, although we're a security agency, at our meetings with stakeholders. We ask the stakeholders who they would like to invite. So in Houston, for instance, where I hold some of these meetings, the community groups have expressed they don't want the FBI to attend, for instance. So the FBI does not attend. And that gets us in hot water sometimes, but we try to work it out. And I'm going through these really quickly because I have a short period of time in which to work on these issues. But we try to address challenging issues and try not to shy away from addressing challenging issues. There's a tendency in the federal government and other government agencies to become defensive about a lot of these issues because we're bureaucratic and slow to change. So we also try not to address challenging issues, but we try to overcome that tendency. Sharing information, we're local, so we try to engage with the grassroots community. I said we do 14 cities, we're expanding to 17. without any additional funds. So this is all the same individuals working with the same pot of money. So we're getting spread pretty thin. We engage early and consistently. We try to, when I say identify the right people, we'll go out to people's houses and go eat, go have some food with them, sit down at the table, much as Alok does with the community. And we try to do that in many of the cities that we work in. We involve government partners. So I attend bridges on behalf of the Department of Homeland Security Civil Rights Office from Washington. Unfortunately, that's where I'm from. And so, I fly out and I attend those meetings as much as I can and try to bring kind of that semblance of local knowledge back to Washington. So I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to go through all of it. I will take a last minute that I have to talk about our kind of overarching goal at DHS, which is to build resiliency through a lot of these engagement opportunities. And that's really, Alok covered some of it, so I'm not going to go into that much detail, but it's basically to help communities that are often marginalized or prone to, specifically according to the White House's strategy, prone to Al-Qaeda extremists or that narrative, to provide them whatever resources that we can to help them further build resiliency in their communities, whether that's a community awareness briefing or a tabletop exercise, for instance, where we take law enforcement and have them make decisions as if they're the community and have the community make decisions as if they're law enforcement. And we have kind of a scenario, much as it's like the scenario that Alok outlined, where you have a young individual that might be disaffected. And then we ask law enforcement, you're no longer law enforcement. How tough is it to look at this individual and decide kind of what to do? It's not an easy question. If this individual shows up at a mosque, how difficult is it to deal with these issues, and vice versa? Or whether it's an ICCT. In the wake of the Boston Marathon bombings, we had a community coordination call where we brought in folks a couple hours after the bombing occurred, and a lot of community members and the U.S. Attorney and folks from Washington, and said, are you having any problems with retaliation? We may not even have identified the suspect at that point, but we want to make sure that the community, the faith-based community, the Muslim community, American community, has the resources they need if they're feeling threatened. Maybe the police can do extra patrols there. Maybe DHS can go out and help install cameras. We have protective security advisors that do that kind of work. So my last point I will talk about is maybe some of the challenges that we faced. One is kind of managing expectations. We have a broad and deep program, and folks feel that you've accomplished one thing. What about the next one? And sometimes it takes time to work with kind of faith-based communities and the government to accomplish these goals. And the second is really dealing with when you're dealing with kind of national security issues, and Alok hit upon this as well, is the kind of dichotomy between control and kind of freedom. How much information can we share with these communities, as much as we'd like to, and what's appropriate to share, and kind of dealing with that frustration that folks may have on the other side of the table when you're working with national security or homeland security information. So I'm out of time, and I don't want to go longer in respect to my colleagues. So go ahead, Evan.
So in an additional minute, if I could ask you to just talk a little bit about the challenge of entering into the conversation with communities about engaging in this work about resilience. You're talking to communities about their own fears that their kids may get enticed into bad behavior that can get them in a lot of trouble. How do you approach getting folks into a conversation with federal law enforcement agencies about that?
And that's a great question, and we don't have an answer to that question. We're still kind of trying to figure out what we're going to do. I mean, there's the Establishment Clause, so we are limited in terms of what we can do when it comes to religion as a government agency. But kind of one thing is placing the conversation about these sensitive issues within the context of the community's concerns, kind of reframing the conversation and saying, you know, I'm a Muslim, so I as a Muslim, do I want something like this to happen again in my community? You know, that's kind of one concern. The other is we really try to be, you know, kind of hands off and say we're just offering the tools, whether folks want to avail themselves, the community wants to avail themselves of these tools or not is completely up to them. We're sensitive to many communities, members, religious leaders that may feel that there's a stigma upon them when they engage with the government, particularly Homeland Security agencies or justice or security-related agencies. So we're sensitive about that. So we're out there, we're offering tools to the community to build resilience. Our goals as a community member, I can say, and as the government are really the same, and that's to build strong and safe communities. And it kind of defeats the purpose when the community doesn't feel safe kind of engaging with us. So I don't know if that's an answer to your question, but.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. We have a little time for questions now, and you have all been sitting and listening for hours. And so what I would like to do is to begin by asking you to take 2 minutes, turn to the 1 or 2 people next to you, and just discuss for 2 minutes this question: what one thing has stood out for you in what you've heard over the course of this panel? And I'll come back to you and open the floor up for your questions. And if you folks wanted to take this 2 minutes to just say, talk with each other, do you have comments for each other that you would like a chance to bring out when we open the floor back up?
I liked all of what you guys said. Should we go over there?
YouTube, right? Right. The longer format of this was to be that I was going to ask you guys to share your comments while I collect the index cards, but we're so far behind that I'm going to switch to. Are there any particular themes?
I think the one thing that I did not mention is taking recognition the already outreach that is done in different regions, different communities, and also listen to them and listen to them.
And I don't know if you folks talked about it, if this is relevant, folks to the assessment. Because you mentioned metrics briefly, but I don't think we had time to get into it.
I think that assessment time here was very important, place for the community. We met quite a bit and kind of resolved amongst ourselves that this process was extremely important and that we were
Yeah. And if you would now just take another minute, to figure out what's the one question you would most like to ask the panel. And then I'll start taking the questions.
I still forward the same thing that yes, thank you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to start taking your questions now. Before I do, I've been I've received the kind of request that as an academic, as a teacher, as a program director, department chair, whatever, you just hate. I mean, this is terribly painful, but I'm going to bow to pressure and allow Essen a couple of minutes to say.
Not even a couple of minutes, but I just wanted to say to all the students in the room that are interested in government service or government work, we have a fantastic internship program. Like all the internship programs currently in the nation's capital. It's unpaid, but trust me, it's fantastic. You'll get a clearance, you'll get to travel with us, you'll meet folks from all over the country and work on some very interesting issues. So if you're interested and you're a student, come and approach me and I'll tell you more about it.
And if you miss Essen today, talk to us and we will play broker and connect you up. That's a wonderful offer. Thank you so much. And now, your questions. What has bubbled up? And if we can, do we have mics? Yeah. One moment, Danielle is coming across.
We started this session with the hypothetical, presumably hypothetical case of a University of Massachusetts student of Muslim extraction who was acting strangely. And our table would really like to hear that, how that would play out in the Bridges context or another context. In other words, we're missing a little bit the concreteness. You've gone around and told us some of the delicate things and about the conversation, but we couldn't actually understand what issues you deal with and how you deal with them. And perhaps you could take that hypothetical and carry it through for us, and we would learn much from it.
Who would like to take the first shot at that?
I'll take a first shot, because what we propose, and as Essen was just alluding, is one of the tools that that government has to offer with regards to how communities might provide their own solutions to that issue. The first question is that even a problem? I mean, are we a country that sees aberrant behavior or somebody who's being a little reclusive is becoming more religious? That is the trigger somehow to more investigative intrusion? I mean, I don't think that's our country. And yet, people within the community, as well as people who are in the security apparatus, as well as maybe just indifference, would all look at certain set of criteria as raising certain red flags. So, number one, simply having a discussion as to what is that line that we should now, as a government or as a community, be taking action. And I submit to you, it's a different line for when communities should take action from when, compared to when government should take action. And that's a crucial discussion to this resilience dialogue. You know, if we don't want another Boston bombing, or if we don't want some kind of thing to happen again, at what line are communities willing to take certain actions? And as always, you want them to be commensurate with the nature of the risk or the nature of the information, but I think there is a call that that conversation happen. The second point I would raise is that it raises a vehicle for having a discussion as to the myriad of different options that might be on the table. You know, at what point can you have some kind of intervention from community resources? At what time are medical and mental health and public health resources available? At what point can just simply offering to do a seminar or a talk by people who are in the security establishment at the university, and maybe having it be something that can either impact that individual or rather the constellation of folks around that person. So those are all ways to think about creative problem solving, which we are just now, unfortunately, embarking upon, not because we haven't thought about it for a long time, but because the reality and as you point out, the impact of those events, of those kind of efforts, wasn't appreciated. And the hope is that over time, we will have more community involvement in that, and NGOs and others who are part of civil society will help broker those things to provide some solutions. I can tell you what the investigative responses would be, but that's not the dimension upon which we're engaging.
Anyone else?
I would like to just comment on that, is that it's very difficult in a situation like that, because it's really has nothing to do with a religion or a community. It has to do with that person. And a lot of times it's psychological factors that's motivating a person. It is something that, take Columbine, for example. None of those parents ever suspected that their child is going to go out and do something like that. In that same context, somebody very close to you, if they lead a very compartmentalized life, they have a motive, they have an agenda to hide something from you, they're suffering from some kind of psychological disorder, you're not going to be able to make it out. So if a parent or a wife or other relatives cannot understand that individual, then how is a community going to be able to understand what's going on? So I think it's really a people issue. And in that situation, it's either you have a zero tolerance policy in a community, where anybody that exhibits any kind of bad behavior, you're going to just report them and let the government take care of them. That's the only thing that's going to work, but it's very difficult. It's a difficult problem.
I think the most important thing from perspective of the community is, number one, you want to make a distinction between an individual misbehavior and the generalization that is the product of stereotyping. And that is something very significant, because many of the young people, especially children in schools, you can't imagine the amount of harassment they go through, or the tormentation that especially young girls go through in schools, especially if they are wearing hijab or so on and so forth. So that's an aspect that we need to deal with, and we also need to get the authorities, for example, to make at least directives to the different principals or different school staff that these are things that are not necessarily need to happen. The second thing is the sense that the community will get as far as their voice being heard. And number three, what is expected from the authorities that the community need to know about. And it has been very enlightening, especially the educative processes by which the lawyers came and talk about individual rights, about community responses and government investigation, and also the intervention in certain specific cases, which things have been clarified in a way that the outcome would have been absolutely different. So these are the kind of things. Just to make things easier for people to understand, what happens is that we meet every last Thursday of the month, and then there would be like a round table, and there will be about 50 people sitting together, and then there will be agenda that has been already set 1 week before, and then people discuss the issues, and also if there are specific cases that people will raise without going into details.
You know, these are all good responses. I just want to highlight one thing when we're thinking about these issues that a lot of people sometimes forget. We talk about violent extremism, and we use the word violent for a reason. You know, it's okay to be a radical in this country. Radicals are the people that founded this country were radicals. So when we're doing this kind of work, we encourage and try to remember that violence is what we're really looking at. Most government agencies, such as DHS and the Department of Justice, are also not in the business of providing social services. We're mostly post-incident organizations that come in, like Alok talked about, and conduct investigations or adjudicate cases. DHS specifically has a prevention mandate, and really the tools that we found in terms of working on violent extremism from the prevention side are merely just encouraging dialogue with community members and among community members, and to engaging with individuals using some of the tools that we've talked about to allow individuals, especially young adults, and we have a completely different program that we work with young adults with. In fact, there's going to be in a few weeks a program in Houston, a tabletop exercise where I talk, bringing young adults and we're bringing law enforcement. And some of these young adults have expressed strong opinions about law enforcement, and we'll have them switch roles. And it's just very interesting for some of these young adults to see the FBI agent that they've maligned at the table and see that they're human, that they have a job, and vice versa. as well. And allow them to express these strong opinions in a safe environment so that they don't feel that they have to express them in a violent manner. So anyway.
Let's see if we can get one or two more questions, and I do want to make one meta observation about this response from all four of these panelists to that question, which is that part of what you've been hearing is 4 people out of a group of about 50, and there are several other members of the group in the room as well, who meet monthly and have these conversations. So part of what we're talking about is the fact that this conversation is going on a regular basis, both in general, but also prompted by specific instances, cases, concerns that arise. And I think it's part of what's really important about this effort. Another question? Sir.
Thank you. You've been talking about these community forums as an opportunity to get feedback from the community, for the community to be able to raise their concerns and have you at least listen to be sure that their voices are heard. I was wondering if it works in the other direction also. That is, if the governmental people raise issues about perceived discrimination on part of the community or unfair stereotyping of other communities, whether there's any issues sort of raised with how the community is behaving.
Thank you.
Actually, I will give a specific example. The harassment that happens in the schools and agonizing experiences of young students or pupils have been raised in a forum where the governor was attending. And he took it immediately as seriously as possible, and he directed all the different agencies that have anything to do with this to put a remedy to that issue. There have been also instances whereby we have been alerted to the fact that there are certain targeting of the Muslim community, for example, by some fraudulent kind of misrepresentation, or people will tell people that they are calling from the IRS or calling from FBI or what have you, want people to release information, and these were conveyed to the community and was received by the community as an important thing. The last thing I would like to say is that we always have community meetings whereby representatives from the government will come and speak to the community, and they will receive answers. And many times the confrontation is really heated, that people would raise their points so forcefully that the representative of the different government agencies will be responding to.
We have time for, I think, one more question. Here we go.
I don't want to take up too much time. I would rather hear other people ask questions, but since there is no other question, so I will ask. A question actually has to do with what comment Ahsan made. I could always ask you privately, Ahsan, but I thought other people may also benefit from the answer that you may give. You made a comment that, which I didn't know, that you essentially, as you're traveling around the countries and the communities that you're meeting, about 20% of them are Muslims. So I'm wondering, what's the mix of other communities that you're dealing with? First 3 or 5 communities that you can think of, and what kind of issues are they facing? Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you for that question. So just a little bit of background. When the first secretary, Tom Ridge, it was really Secretary Chertoff that kind of this program came in, became a larger program. And at that time, we were engaging mostly with the American Muslim, the Sikh, the South Asian, and the Arab American communities, primarily because A, they were expressing the larger number of concerns, and 2, we felt that they were experiencing most of the disparate impact of many of our policies, DHS policies in particular. As engagement went on, as we created policies to deal with religious headgear, hijab, a Sikh person's turban, we felt that some of these concerns, we didn't hear about these concerns again and again, although some concerns we continue to hear them. On the other hand, we started hearing about concerns from other communities, from the immigration advocacy community, so not a community that's of a particular ethnic or religious minority, but is an interest-based or issue-based group. So we have a lot of immigration advocates that come to our roundtables and engage with us in other ways. The LGBT community, the African American community, you know, name an interest group, and they are likely represented in one of our 14 cities. So it's very diverse. The Muslim American community, like I said, I think that's the average that I've seen. In some cities, there's more Muslim Americans that are attending, and some of those other original groups that I outlined. In other cities, for instance, in Houston, it's you know, at least 50% of the folks that attend are from the immigration you know, advocacy community. We have the you know, American Immigration Lawyers Association attends. ACLU attends a lot of our roundtables. So organizations that represent different interests are one group. But if you can think of an interest group, they're probably at our roundtable.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking once again our panel.